Unit 4, Communication, the Influence of Language, Culture, and Gender. Chapter 7, Classroom Communication, Language and Culture in the Classroom.
Today's lecture deals with the topic of language, culture, and communication in classrooms in the United States. Samavara and Porter, in their book Intercultural Communication, define communication as a form of human behavior that results from a need to interact with other human beings. As a result of this need, we send verbal and nonverbal messages to communicate with both friends and strangers. Communications can take the form of talk, or it can take the form of gestures, or nonverbal signals of one kind or another. The talk or signals send messages that communicate a person's thoughts, feelings, and intentions to others. Many scholars study the topic of communication in general, and speech communication specifically, in order to learn how individuals send and interpret messages. A number of these scholars conduct research on the topic of intercultural communication. That is, they study communication between people from different cultures. One area of research in intercultural communication is the study of the influence of the setting or environment on the success and or failure of communication. In this lecture, I will be talking about one specific aspect of intercultural communication. That is, intercultural communication that takes place in the classroom. This information is taken from a book chapter written by Janice Anderson and Robert Powell titled Intercultural Communication and the Classroom. It appeared in Samavara and Porter's edited book, Intercultural Communication. When you are asked to picture a classroom in your mind's eye, what do you see? You probably see a classroom that is familiar to you and that would be familiar to students from your culture. However, not everyone will see the same picture in their minds. Although many people have similar images of what a classroom looks like in their mind's eye, their culture greatly influences the way they view the teacher-student relationship, and culture also influences how a person understands the ways in which information is taught and learned in the classroom. Culture also plays an important role in determining how teachers and students communicate in the classroom. In this lecture, I'll give you a few examples of some of the ways that culture affects this communication. The classroom, as we know it, by the way, is a relatively recent innovation, according to Janice Anderson and Robert Powell. Great teachers like Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and Confucius taught without the benefit of a board, chalk, desks, the standard comforts or discomforts of a classroom building. But let me return to the main topic of this lecture: the influence of culture on behavior and communication between teacher and students in the classroom. If you have come from another culture to study in the United States, you may already have noticed that teachers and students in American universities interact and communicate in the classroom in ways that differ from how teachers and students communicate in your home culture. It's culture that influences and establishes these interactions and communication patterns. Of course, culture is a term that is used in many different ways. Basically, culture provides us with a system of knowledge that allows us to communicate with others and teaches us how to interpret their verbal and nonverbal behavior. Culture influences and establishes how people interact with one another, or do not interact with one another. In particular, culture influences the rituals that take place in the classroom setting, and it influences the way that students participate in the classroom discourse. It also influences the esteem in which teachers are held. Just what exactly are rituals? Well, I'll give you a dictionary definition to begin with. Rituals are systematic procedures used to perform a certain act or to communicate a certain message. Well, there are many rituals associated with teaching and learning, and education in general. Rituals are systematic procedures used to perform a certain act or to communicate a certain message. In some countries, when a teacher enters the classroom, the students ritually stand up. In the United States, a ritual occurs when a student raises her hand to signal the teacher that she knows the answer to a question. This is not a universal classroom ritual to signal intent to answer a question, however. Jamaican students snap or flap their fingers to signal that they want to answer a question that has been posed. In some college and graduate level seminars in American universities, students do not make any physical signs when they want to speak. They state their ideas whenever they feel the urge or when it's appropriate. This sort of classroom behavior is especially confusing to students from cultures in which there are no rituals for attracting the teacher's attention because the student is not expected to participate in the class at all. This brings us to the issue of classroom participation. North American students of European origin are usually more talkative in class and more willing to state their opinions than students of Native American heritage or from Asian backgrounds. This difference is directly related to cultural values about learning and education and classroom behavior. Euro-American students' cultures teach them that learning is shaped and helped by their talk and active engagement in exploring or discussing issues. Asian students, however, are generally taught that they will learn best by listening to and absorbing the knowledge being given to them by the teacher. In their article, Anderson and Powell point out that some cultures do not have a way for students to signal a desire to talk to a teacher. In these cultures, students speak out only after the teacher has spoken to them. Most classroom interaction in Vietnam is tightly controlled by the teacher, according to Anderson and Powell. The esteem in which teachers are held also varies from culture to culture. According to researchers Samovar and Porter, the Vietnamese have a great deal of respect for their instructors and consider them to be honored members of society. The Vietnamese and many other Asian peoples see the teacher, the instructor, and the professor as the very symbol of learning and culture. In Germany, students value the personal opinions of their instructors, and it is not customary to disagree with or contradict a teacher during class. Israeli students, on the other hand, can criticize an instructor if they feel that he or she is wrong about an issue, or they believe has provided incorrect information, according to Samovar and Porter. There are many other ways that culture can affect interaction and communication between teachers and students in the classroom. I have discussed differences in how students get the teacher's attention during class, and I have pointed out the differences in the ways students from various cultures participate and communicate with the teacher during class. From this brief consideration of classroom communication, you should begin to see that learning a language involves more than studying the vocabulary, idioms, and the grammar of the language. If you are to succeed in communicating in a second language classroom, you need to learn not only the language spoken in the classroom, but also the expected procedures of classroom participation and communication. That is, the rituals of language, culture, and communication.
Unit 4, Communication, the Influence of Language, Culture, and Gender. Chapter 8, Gender and Communication, Male-Female Conversation as Cross-Cultural Communication.
In the last lecture, you heard about the relationship between culture and classroom communication. In this lecture, I'll talk about another variable that affects human communication. That variable is gender. Gender is the social identity that men and women learn as they grow up in a culture. For example, boys learn to be masculine and girls learn to be feminine as they grow to be men and women. Researchers have shown that men and women, and boys and girls for that matter, communicate in quite different ways and in different amounts depending on the situation the speakers find themselves in, and the reason or reasons they're communicating with other people. Many cultures actually encourage men and women to talk differently and in different amounts, and these patterns for communicating are learned when men and women are young boys and girls. Children learn how to talk to other children or adults and how to have conversations, not only from their parents, but also from their peers, other boys and girls their age. In her best-selling book, You just don't understand. Deborah Tannen points out that although American boys and girls often play together, they spend most of their time playing in same-sex groups. She also points out that boys and girls do play some games together, but their favorite games are very often quite different. Tannen and other researchers on this topic have found that young boys, say ages 8 through 12, tend to play outside the home rather than in, and they play in large groups that are hierarchically structured. The group of boys generally has a leader who tells the other boys what to do and how to do it. It is by giving orders and making the other boys play by the rules that boys achieve higher and more dominant status in the play group. Boys also achieve status by taking center stage. They take center stage by talking a lot. They give orders and commands. They tell a lot of stories and jokes. They command attention by dominating conversations and by interrupting other boys who are speaking. The researchers also found that boys' games often have clear winners and losers and elaborate systems of rules. Researchers found that girls play different kinds of games and abide by different rules when playing their game. In addition, girls and groups use different patterns of communication and different styles of communication when playing together. Tannen and her colleagues have found that young girls often play in small groups or in pairs. They play less often in large groups or teams outside the home. Girls' play is not so hierarchically ordered as boys' play is. In their most frequent games, like hopscotch and jump rope, every girl gets a chance to play. In many of their play activities, such as playing house, there are no winners or losers. Researchers have also found that girls usually don't give many direct orders or commands to their playmates. They express their preferences as suggestions, according to Tannen. Girls often say to their playmates, "Let's do this or that." Boys, on the other hand, are more direct in ordering their playmates to do this or that. Tannen is quick to point out that North American boys, as well as girls, want to get their way and want other children to do what they want them to do. However, boys and girls try to get their playmates to do what they want them to do in different ways. Another well-known researcher, Marjorie Harness Goodwin, compared boys and girls engaged in two task-oriented activities. The boys were making slingshots in preparation for a fight. The girls were making jewelry. They were making rings for their fingers. Goodwin noted that the boys' activity group was hierarchically arranged. The leader told the other boys what to do and how to do it. The girls making the rings were more egalitarian. Everyone made suggestions about how to make the rings, and the girls tended to listen and accept the suggestions of the other girls in the group. Goodwin is not suggesting that girls never engage in some of the communication and management behaviors boys engage in. In fact, in another study, she found that when girls play house, the girl who plays the mother gives the orders to the girls who play the children. Girls seem to give orders to their peers less often than boys do when they play. The girls are practicing parent-child relationships in the game of playing house. It's very likely that when little boys play their games, they are also practicing the masculine roles they're expected to assume when they grow up. As a result of our cultural upbringing, we learn norms of behavior and patterns of communication that are often gender-based and sometimes gender-biased. We also develop stereotypes about how and how much males and females, that is, boys and girls or women and men, should and do communicate. However, researchers have shown that many of these stereotypes actually turn out to be quite wrong. A common stereotype that many people hold is the idea that women talk a lot, perhaps too much, and that they're always interrupting or trying to get center stage when someone else is talking. There is, in fact, a proverb that reinforces this idea. It states that foxes are all tail and women are all tongue. Actually, recent research on the influence of gender on communication has shown the exact opposite to be true in many instances. Researchers have found that men usually produce more talk than women and are more likely to interrupt another speaker than women will, particularly in public settings such as business meetings. So, although women are believed to talk more than men, study after study has shown that it is men who talk more at meetings, in mixed group discussions, and in classrooms where girls or young women sit next to boys or young men. And this finding holds even for communicative interactions between very educated and successful professional men and women, such as professors, for example. Deborah Tannen, in her book, You Just Don't Understand, cites a study conducted by Barbara and Jean Eakins, who tape recorded and studied 7 university faculty meetings. They found that, with one exception, men professors spoke more often and without exception for a longer period of time than women professors did. The men took center stage and talked from 10.66 seconds to 17.07 seconds, while the women talked from 3 to 10 seconds on the average. Tannen points out that the women's longest turns were still shorter than the men's shortest turns. Angela Simeone reports another example of this phenomenon in her book, Academic Women. She found that women professors talk at departmental meetings less often than their male colleagues do. When asked how often they spoke at departmental meetings, 46% of the American men professors reported that they spoke often at these meetings, but only 15% of the women professors reported that they spoke often at departmental meetings. Perhaps it is our social concept of what is feminine and what is masculine that reinforces the stereotype that women talk more than men, and even causes these different patterns of communication. Maybe a woman is labeled talkative or is criticized for interrupting if she does these things at all, because our culture, as well as many cultures, teaches that women should be quiet if they want to be feminine. Perhaps masculine culture encourages boys and men to dominate, talk, and interrupt more often, and males who talk a lot and interrupt are often not criticized for doing so. These differences in the patterns of communication and styles of communicating are studied by researchers who study the effects of gender on communication. They study these effects in order to understand why misunderstandings occur between men and women in conversation. Often it's because their styles and patterns of conversation are so different. It is important that we learn to recognize these differences so that we can learn to communicate better with people of other gender. It is important to emphasize that these differences may be specific to North American culture. Gender can affect communication in even more and stronger ways in some other cultures. In Zulu culture, for example, a wife is forbidden to say any words that sound like the names of her father-in-law or brothers. This means she must paraphrase these words, and she's expected to do so. So you see, cultural differences are not the only things that affect language and communication. Language is affected by gender as well. I'm sure you can think of many ways that gender affects communication between men and women in your own culture.